In early November 2013, nothing about Paul Walker's life suggested an ending. There were no visible fractures in his routine, no public signs of pressure building beneath the surface. His schedule was structured, his focus intact, and his trajectory, both professionally and personally, appeared steady. If anything, he seemed to be entering a more grounded phase of his life, one that balanced global recognition with something quieter and more intentional. At that time, Walker was in the middle of filming Furious 7, a project that carried both expectation and momentum. The Fast and Furious series had evolved into something far larger than its early installments, and Walker remained one of its central figures. On set in Atlanta, the work continued without interruption. Reports from colleagues and crew later described him as focused, consistent, and professional, exactly as he had always been. There was no disruption in his behavior. No indication that anything had shifted. But what defined this period wasn't just his work in film. By 2013, a significant part of Walker's identity existed outside of Hollywood. In 2010, he had founded Reach Out Worldwide, a disaster relief organization that emphasized rapid hands-on response. Unlike many celebrity-backed initiatives, this wasn't symbolic involvement. Walker participated directly, traveling to affected areas and contributing physically to recovery efforts. By November, that mission had become deeply integrated into his daily life. Filming continued through the first half of the month without any notable deviation. The schedule was demanding but controlled. Each day followed a pattern: early call times, long hours on set, coordination with cast and crew. There were no abrupt changes, no unexpected cancellations, no reports of tension. Everything aligned with the expectations of a large-scale production moving forward on schedule. As Thanksgiving approached, filming paused temporarily. This break had been planned in advance. Walker returned to California, transitioning from the structured environment of production back to a more personal setting. He intended to spend time with family, including his daughter, Meadow. This period, those few days surrounding Thanksgiving, stands out for a different reason. Not because something happened, but because nothing did. There are no records of unusual behavior. No public appearances that suggest stress or distraction. No accounts of conflict or concern. He was at home, moving through a routine that appeared calm and familiar. Thanksgiving Day itself passed quietly. It did not carry the weight that it would later be given in hindsight. At the time, it was simply a pause, time away from work, time spent in a controlled, private environment. The following day, November 29th, continued in much the same way. There were no significant public movements, no interviews, no events that drew attention. On the surface, it was uneventful. But in the background, a small detail had already been set in motion. A gathering was scheduled for the next day, November 30th. It was not a large-scale public event. It wasn't widely promoted or covered by media. Instead, it was connected to Reach Out Worldwide, intended to raise support for victims of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Walker had a pattern of attending these kinds of events personally. He did not treat them as obligations. He showed up, engaged directly, and remained present in a way that felt consistent with how he approached his work outside of acting. November 30th began without urgency. There was no indication that the day would carry any significance beyond what had been planned. Walker was expected to attend the event in Santa Clarita, California, at a location known as Always Evolving, a performance auto shop closely associated with his friend and business partner, Roger Rodas. Rodas was not a distant collaborator. He was deeply integrated into Walker's life, both professionally and personally. A financial advisor and a professional race car driver, he shared Walker's interest in high-performance vehicles. Their connection extended beyond business. It was built on trust, shared time, and common focus. When Walker arrived at the event, the atmosphere was controlled and informal. It was not crowded in the way large celebrity gatherings tend to be. The attendees included car enthusiasts, supporters of the organization, and individuals connected to the local community. There were no large media crews documenting every moment. Instead, the environment allowed for something more natural. Walker moved through the space without drawing attention to himself. He spoke with attendees, listened, and engaged in conversations that were not structured or staged. Photographs from the event show him relaxed, present, and consistent with how he had appeared in similar settings before. Nothing about his demeanor suggested distraction. Nothing indicated urgency. Time passed steadily. The event continued without interruption, following a quiet rhythm. Conversations overlapped, people moved through the space, and the purpose of the gathering, supporting disaster relief efforts, remained at the center. There was no defined turning point. No moment where the tone shifted. But as the afternoon progressed, the timeline itself began to narrow, not in a way visible to those present, but in retrospect, when each movement is placed in sequence. At some point later in the day, Walker and Roger Rodas prepared to leave. There was no announcement marking their departure. No notable pause that drew attention. It was a simple transition, one part of the day ending, another beginning. They moved toward a car. A Porsche Carrera GT. For both men, this was not unfamiliar territory. The vehicle represented something they understood well. It was part of a world they were comfortable in, a world defined by precision, engineering, and control. From the outside, nothing about this moment stands out. No urgency. No visible hesitation. Just a decision to leave. They entered the car. The environment behind them continued unchanged. The event did not pause. Conversations carried on. No one present had a reason to focus on that departure as anything significant. Because at that exact moment it wasn't. The engine started. The car pulled away. And for a brief period after that, measured not in minutes but in perception, everything remained aligned with the day as it had been. The timeline had not yet broken. The structure of the day was still intact. What happened next did not begin with a sudden shift. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A continuation of motion. A road that, at first, offered no indication that anything was about to change. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. The car moved through Santa Clarita without drawing attention. There was no chase. No sense of urgency. No reason for anyone nearby to notice it as anything other than another vehicle passing through a familiar stretch of road. Inside, everything remained routine. The route was short. The drive, by all accounts, was not intended to be significant. Just a continuation of the day, one location to another. And for a brief moment, nothing felt different. The event behind them continued. People remained gathered. Conversations carried on. The timeline, as it existed for everyone else, hadn't shifted. But along Hercules Street, something began to change. Not dramatically. Not in a way that could be seen from a distance. Just a gradual increase in speed, documented later, measured, reconstructed through investigation. The Porsche Carrera GT was built for precision. For performance. For control at high speeds. But that control depends on conditions, on timing, on environment, on exact inputs. According to official findings, the car accelerated beyond a safe threshold for that specific road. And then, within seconds, the structure of the day collapsed. There was no extended sequence of warning. No long moment to react. The vehicle lost control. It veered off course, striking a light pole with force before colliding with multiple trees. The impact was immediate, severe, and final. What followed happened quickly. Too quickly for intervention. The damage to the vehicle was catastrophic. The structure of the car absorbed the force, but the consequences were irreversible. Within moments of the crash, the vehicle caught fire. There was no gradual escalation. No window where the outcome could be redirected. Emergency responders arrived shortly after, but the conditions at the scene made survival impossible. Both Paul Walker and Roger Rodas were pronounced dead at the scene. Back at the event, the shift was not immediate. For a short time, the separation between those two locations remained intact. People continued talking, moving, existing inside the same structure of the day that had been in place for hours. Then information began to return. Fragmented at first. Unclear. A report. A message. Something about an accident nearby. At that stage, nothing connected directly. Not yet. As details sharpened, the distance between the two timelines closed. The location matched. The vehicle was identified. And slowly the realization moved through the crowd, not all at once but in stages. Confusion came first. Then silence. Then confirmation. News began to spread beyond Santa Clarita within minutes. Initial reports were inconsistent. Some questioned the accuracy. Others waited for official confirmation. Because the timing felt impossible. Just hours earlier, Paul Walker had been seen at a public event. Present, engaged, completely aligned with everything expected of him. There had been no transition. No visible shift from one state to another. And yet, by the end of that same afternoon, the narrative had changed completely. Authorities conducted a full investigation in the days that followed. The conclusions were direct. Speed was a primary factor. There was no evidence of drugs or alcohol in either Walker or Roger Rodas. No mechanical failure was found that initiated the crash. The findings did not suggest complexity. They suggested precision. A set of conditions that, when aligned in a specific way, produced a single irreversible outcome. But understanding the cause does not resolve the impact. Because when people returned to the timeline, to those final 30 days, they found no clear lead-up. No escalation. No warning signs embedded in his behavior. What they found instead was continuity. Walker had been working, spending time with family, engaged in his organization Reach Out worldwide, moving forward with plans that extended beyond that month. There was no visible indication that the timeline was approaching its end. The news, once confirmed, spread globally. The reaction was immediate and sustained. Fans gathered at the crash site, leaving flowers, messages, and reminders of the impact Walker had made, not just through film but through the way he carried himself outside of it. Across media platforms, moments from the Fast and Furious resurfaced. Scenes that once felt current now carried a different weight. They were no longer part of an ongoing story. They had become something fixed. Production on Furious 7 was halted. The future of the project was uncertain. Not because of logistics alone but because of what had been lost. Walker wasn't just a lead actor. He was a central presence, on screen and off. Eventually, the film was completed using a combination of existing footage, stand-ins, and digital techniques. It was released in 2015, with a closing sequence that served as a quiet tribute. Not dramatic, not overstated, but final. In the years that followed, discussion around the crash remained grounded in the established facts. There were no credible alternative explanations supported by evidence. However, certain elements continued to be examined. The performance characteristics of the Porsche Carrera GT. The conditions of the road. The margin for error at high speeds. Not as speculation, but as attempts to understand how quickly control can be lost, even in familiar circumstances. And that is where the weight of the story remains. Not in unanswered questions, but in contrast. Because the final month of Paul Walker's life does not follow the pattern people expect. There is no visible decline. No series of events building toward an inevitable outcome. Instead, there is structure. Routine. A sequence of days that move forward without disruption. Until, suddenly, they don't. What makes this story linger isn't mystery. It's clarity. Everything about that final month is documented, stable, and real. Which means there is no hidden turning point to find. No moment where everything clearly changed direction. Only a single point in time. Where an ordinary day following a predictable path became something else entirely.